Duncan Morgan is an icon to me and many people here in Natchez. I've known him all of my life, or I should say he's known me all of my life. We have a family connection, and I also think he is the most well-known brick mason in the state of Mississippi.
There are not many old brick buildings here that Duncan has not worked on. Always calm, always diligent, high standards. I've heard several people describe Duncan as the best civil engineer in Natchez who never went to engineering school. I also consider him one of my very best friends.
Wow, Duncan Morgan. He's the ultimate professional. Preservationist, restoration. The ultimate compliment is, I think, if he's been there, you can't see that he's been there. Especially if there were like a hole in the middle of a wall or something that he really had to patch up. And he makes the lines right, he makes the mortar lines right, he makes just everything perfect. And you can't tell that he was even there.
He's made all the difference in the world to have someone of his historical knowledge and willingness to share his gifts and talents and to faithfully execute the work that he was called to do. I don't know where our houses would be without the work that he has done.
I've been in Natchez 92 years from a family that goes back 200 years. I'm just Natchez. Old Natchez is the best way to describe it. I lived for 90 years on the same spot of ground where my mother was born in the house on one side of me. Her father was born in the house on the other side, and his father had been born in a house that was all on the same tract of land, and they traced it back to like 1820. So, deep roots. Armstrong Tire. That was the first major manufacturing plant in the state of Mississippi. I watched it being constructed. It's right up, in sight of my house. My mother's father was a bricklayer, and my father and most of his brothers were bricklayers. I remember, in fact, the first job I went on in the summer of '44, when I went a few days with my dad. I was 12, between 12 and 13, repairing a wall for an old Natchez family. And my father said he didn't want me to stay in it because the weather and the different factors and all that. And I was actually in school at Xavier University in New Orleans. I just finished my freshman year when working with my dad, and he fell on a building in Faraday and died, and I just stayed home and worked. And it has always been instilled in me, whatever you do your very best.
He comes from a generation of brick masons, as he probably told you. I don't think, had his father not fallen off a scaffold in Faraday, Louisiana, building a movie theater, I have no doubt that Duncan would have become a mathematician or an engineer. And he was the only son of 5 children. I think he has 4 sisters. And somebody had to come home and support the family. And so he came home from Xavier in New Orleans, where I believe he was studying math or engineering, and picked up the tools of the trade and went to work to support his family. He ended up really liking to work on smaller jobs that were historic jobs, rather than, say, a big new church or something like that. I remember one time a preservationist, the late Billy McGee, who restored several historic buildings, told me about watching Duncan plan a walkway across the street at Myrtle Terrace, another historic house, sitting there looking and drawing, because the house was on an elevation and he needed to get the walk to go from the street to the steps. And he said he would walk around, he would sketch, he would draw, and then he went to work. And Billy and the owner of the house, Richard Durkin, both commented that it was one of the most wonderful engineering feats they had ever seen.
Oh, one of the ones he showed me, every brick at Monmouth. We were there for an event several years ago, and he said, "You see those bricks? I laid those bricks on the grounds of Monmouth." Beautiful, just beautiful.
There are many places. He worked on the Dr. Dub's townhouse that has some of the most amazing brickwork on the front, some of the finest brickwork ever done in town. Melrose is owned by the National Park Service, but Duncan worked on it a lot before it became a government property over the years, over many years. And when you see the quality of the brickwork, it's the finest brickwork in the state of Mississippi, and probably one of the finest examples in the Southeast. And so working on it took someone with extreme skill and ability. You just couldn't let anybody with mortar in their hand touch that building. Probably his greatest masterpiece was Copiah. It was the first brick house in Natchez. And I think there's something sort of wonderful about the fact that that was Duncan's masterpiece too.
Well, the house is historically significant because it was built during the Spanish period. Right at the end of the Spanish period is when its second owner, Manuel Garcia Tejada, bought the house and brought it to probably its current size.
It was Flemish bond, obviously meant to be shown, but had been stuccoed over in the mid-19th century. And the stucco was in very bad shape at Tejada. And seeing the brickwork underneath, the owners decide to remove it. And I don't know how long Duncan was there. I'm sure he could tell you off and on for several years probably. But the work he did on it is phenomenal.
I was probably 14 or 15 years old, living in the servants' quarters in the back during the restoration. And Mr. Duncan and his crew would faithfully come to work long hours, removing every brick of this house, cleaning it and turning it. When my husband and I bought the house after my parents' death, I asked Duncan one time, I said, "Duncan, the stories that everyone tells are that you turned every brick on this house. Did you really turn every brick?" I have many pictures of whole rows and sections being taken out, but was it every brick? He said, "Just about it."
Some were turned around, some were crushed and had to be replaced. But all of the joints had to be repointed. And there weren't too many of the bricks that didn't have to do something to. She was a teenager then.
Well, it's almost like, what do you call it, hero worship? You know, we're just very, very proud to be associated with a man of his character. Not just the skill and the vision, but the way that he views life, the way he knows that we are ordained by God to have certain accomplishments, that we can rise to the occasion to do what we're supposed to do.
Back in 2010 or beginning 11 through 15, we had an extensive restoration project at Holy Family. And Mr. Duncan did, we call him Mr. Duncan, out of reverence to him. He did a lot of the pointing, and he would not take a penny from the church. But he and some of his men did most of the pointing before the restoration project.
Duncan Morgan and Holy Family were inseparable. If you thought of one, you thought of the other. He was always there when the doors opened. And it was an important part of his family's life.
You know, from an altar boy to a little boy involved with everything at the church. And in fact, since I've been here, 1 week, a young fellow, well, young to me, in his 80s, who lived in California, came out here to see me. See, that's the first time in his life he'd ever been in Holy Family and didn't see me. So he asked somebody, where was I, and he told him.
So he's been a great contributor to the church and school. He's also, I call him a walking historian, walking encyclopedian. Anything history, any building here in the city of Natchez, any church, he knows, he can tell you in detail anything about those structures.
As I said, he's worked on just about every home in the downtown area, no matter the age of the home. But of course, his work, especially on the older antebellum homes. To Natchez itself, he's just a real icon.
When the Historic Natchez Foundation opened an office in 1994, it sort of had a mission, and it was to be more inclusive and focus more on the whole tapestry of architecture of the city, as well as to devote time and effort into ethnic history, identifying important buildings to the Black community, recruiting Black members, and doing the same thing with Jewish history, Italian history. We wanted to hit it all. And so Duncan was involved from the beginning, and I have absolutely no doubt he was the first Black member, and he was the first Black president. I will tell you that we have lots of researchers here, and any of those that we think that want to know about Duncan's lifetime period, or somebody that's of an old family, which he is, Black and white. Duncan is both. He's descended from planter aristocracy and enslaved people, both. And I send the scholars out to him, the graduate students and stuff, and usually somebody will email me back or call me and said, that was the most important time I spent in the city of Natchez.
Dad Cochran was an outstanding senator, and a senator for the people of Mississippi. It didn't matter what color, race, creed, religion you were, Senator Thad Cochran was a senator for the people. And for Mr. Duncan to receive this honor in Thad Cochran's name speaks of the volume of respect that the people of this community and the state have for him. But he is very unassuming, and he will always say, well, this was my job. I did my job.
I am appreciative, though perplexed, to be recognized so much for doing what I think I'm supposed to do. And that's not false humility. You know, I remember over 30 years ago doing an interview, the lady from the Natchez Democrat asked me, what epitaph would you like to be on your tombstone? And I had to stop and think a minute. And I told her, he always tried to do his best.